From Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's time for the Gospel Mailbox with Donnie Bryson. If you would like to contact the ministry, you may call Donnie at 423-355-3859. Write Donnie at P.O. Box 2446, Chattanooga, Tennessee 37409. Or email him at this email address, preacher@gospelmailbox.org. And now for today's lesson, here's Donnie Bryson.
And welcome to another edition of our virtual Sunday School class. Today's lesson is entitled A Demand for Justice, and it's for August the 23rd, 2015. And our text is taken from Zechariah, the 7th chapter, verses 8 through 14. And the word of the Lord came unto Zechariah, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, Execute true judgment, and show mercy and compassion, every man to his brother, and oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor, and let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart. But they refused to hearken, and pulled away the shoulder, and stopped their ears that they should not hear. Yea, they made the hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law, and the words which the Lord of hosts has sent to in his spirit by the former prophets. Therefore come a great wrath from the Lord of hosts. Therefore it is come to pass that as he cried, and they would not hear, so they cried, and I would not hear, saith the Lord of hosts. But I scattered them as a whirlwind among all the nations whom they knew not. Thus the Lord was desolate unto them, that no man passed through nor returned, for they laid the pleasant land desolate. Now going back to the 8th verse, where it reads 7 and 8, And the word of the Lord came unto Zechariah, saying. Now, one of the things that you can notice that's a little bit different about this, that's different than our normal vernacular phrasing. Zechariah says, the word of the Lord come into Zechariah, saying. So he's talking about himself more or less in the third person, as if he has stepped outside of himself in talking, and that's a little bit unusual. And also too, and we're just now discussing this Zechariah in our lesson plan, and we want to be careful anytime someone talks about Zechariah in the Bible. We want to be careful that we understand which one of the Zechariahs is being discussed, because, for example, Brother Fawcett in his Bible dictionary lists 28 completely different Zechariahs in both the Old and New Testament. Well, the one we're talking about today is the 11th of the 12 minor prophets. He's the son of Berechiah, the grandson of Iddo, and most likely, if we're carefully read the scriptures, it appears that this Zechariah was a priest. Now, not all Zechariahs in the Bible were priests, but this particular one, it appears to be, he is a priest. Now, going on in the 9th verse, Zechariah 7 and 9, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, execute true judgment, and show mercy and compassion every man to his brother. This phrase, execute true judgment, in the Hebrew is basically the same thing as saying judge judgment of truth. Judge judgment of truth. In other words, when we're evaluating things, when they were to evaluate things, when they were to have matters of law or matters of decisions in the community, that they were to be judging judgments of truth. They were to shun all types of falsehood, all types of giving false impressions. You see, you don't have to really lie to not be judging judgments of truth. You can say things knowing that you're giving someone the wrong impression by leaving out facts that you are privy to, by not speaking the whole truth, by not giving people necessary facts, and give them the wrong impression. I mean, there are all kinds of stories that I'm not going to go into, but stories where have demonstrated that, where people have told the beginning of something and the end of something and left out a very critical and pertinent middle section of the information that leads people to have a completely wrong and incorrect opinion about something. And God condemns that kind of thing. We should not be doing that. We should be judgments of truth. Then another thing too, we want to notice that where the Bible is using this phrase, thus speaketh the Lord. Thus speaketh the Lord. And we want to note that this is basically Zechariah quoting some of the former prophets when he is using that. That is, of course, it's hard to follow that sometimes in the King James Version of the Bible, but what Zechariah is doing is basically quoting the former prophets where these prophets had already said these things. And that's in the past tense, that thus speaketh the Lord. And Isaiah 58, 6 through 7, is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, that thou bring the poor that are cast out of thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh. And then Micah 6 and 8 says, He hath shewed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. So we see these kinds of verses that Zechariah is alluding to, that he is mentioning here, where God had spoke through the prophets, the previous prophets, how that the people of Judah should be conducting themselves. God wants us to deal justly with people, to be merciful to people, to be compassionate toward people, and that kind of thing. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning. It is extremely important. Extremely important. God wants us to be kind and gentle, and holds us accountable the way that we treat our brothers and sisters. And going down to the 10th verse, and oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor, and let none of you imagine evil against his brother in his heart. Evil against his brother in his heart. The Septuagint phrases that, let none of you remember in your hearts the malice of your brother. In other words, whatever contention there has been between you and your brother, let it go. Just let it go. Just let it go. Don't harbor these ill feelings in your heart toward your brother. And then he also says, again, not to vex the widow, the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor. Exodus 22:21 through 22 says, Thou shalt not vex a stranger, nor oppress him, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Ye shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. Deuteronomy 10:18 through 19, He doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and the widow, and loveth the stranger, and giving him food and raiment. Love ye therefore the stranger, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. And that's something that we Americans should really take to heart. The fact that we are a country, unless you're a Native American, we are a country of immigrants. My ancestors were, as best as I can tell, were kicked out of France along about the time of the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre, the Huguenots. They were kicked out of France. They went to Northern Ireland. They were encouraged to leave Northern Ireland. and we came and settled in the southeastern United States. Now, we were strangers in moving from place to place. And, we should all, and I think all of our families, all of us, if we went back through the history of our families, we would see that we were oppressed and put in a bad situation, and left our native country at some point, left the land that we called home, and moved somewhere else. And we should remember that when we are at the store and we hear someone speaking Spanish behind us. They're no different than Irishmen who would come and speak Irish. No different than Germans who would come and be speaking German. No different than the Polish that would be speaking Polish, or the Czech who would be speaking Czech, or the Russians who would be speaking Russian. I mean, you look through the phone book in the United States and you see all of these names of all these different nationalities where people came from all these different countries. And so when you read those verses in the Bible, you can make a very special connection as an American citizen. You can make a special connection with those verses in that Bible that says, ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. And we were strangers in whatever land we came from. Unless, of course, we are Native Americans. We need to, as Christians, take that to heart. We need to make a very special effort to take that to heart. You know, and that's not a political statement. That is a statement. There's some things that go beyond politics. And when we're talking about how we treat the strangers, the immigrants in our country, when we're talking about that kind of thing, it goes beyond politics, and it is directly related to how we are living for God. Okay, going on to the 11th verse, Zechariah 7:11. But they refused to hearken and pulled away the shoulder, and stopped their ears that they should not hear. Now that phrase, pulled away the shoulder, we think of, and it brings to mind where, for example, you're going to get one of your kids, one of your small children, and you're going to shuffle them, let's say, into the car, or shuffle them to bed, and you take them by the shoulder, and you're going to move them toward that general direction. And they pull their shoulder away and begin to resist you trying to move them in that general direction. And that's what this phrase, pulled away the shoulder. That's what the children of Israel, the people of Judah, were doing at that time. They were pulling away the shoulder against God's pushing and maneuvering them in a general direction. We see in Nehemiah 9:29, and testified us against them, that thou mightest bring them again unto thy law. Yet they dealt proudly, and hearkened not unto thy commandments, but sinned against thy judgment, which if a man do, he shall live in them, and withdrew the shoulder, and hardened their neck, and would not hear. Withdrew the shoulder, that same kind of concept of pulling away the shoulder. They withdrew the shoulder. That's how Nehemiah used that phrase. The Geneva Bible says in their notes, and would not carry the Lord's burden, which was sweet and easy, but would bear their own, which was heavy and grievous to the flesh, thinking to gain merit by it, which metaphor is taken from oxen, which shrink at the yoke. And then Zechariah 7:12. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law, and the words which the Lord of hosts hath sent in his Spirit by the former prophets. Therefore came a great wrath from the Lord of hosts. Now, yea, they made their hearts an adamant stone. Let me just read for you what Brother Gill says about this adamant stone. The word here used is translated a diamond in Jeremiah 17:1, and it is said to be harder than a flint in Ezekiel 3:9. The Jewish writers say it is a warm like a barley corn, so strong as to cut the hardest stones in pieces. Moses, they say, used it in hewing the stones for the 2 tablets of the law, and in fitting the precious stones in the ephod, and Solomon in cutting the stones of the building of the temple. It is so hard that it cannot be broken by iron. So basically, from Jewish history, from what the rabbinical tradition is for that particular kind of stone, is that it was the stone that Moses used when he was making the tablets. It was a stone that they used when they were making the ephod, and that it was the stone that they were used to make the stones of the temple. That this substance was so hard that iron could not break it. Now down to the 13th verse. Therefore it come to pass that as he cried, and they would not hear, so they cried, and I would not hear, saith the Lord of hosts. Now, those of you who are in rebellion and backslidden condition against God, and God's dealing with you, you need to listen to this verse and take it to heart, and it should strike fear in your heart. And this is not a misprint in the Bible. It's not an isolated situation in the Bible. But God has said this over and over in different times, that if you turn a deaf ear to God and you ignore Him, and He's dealing and pleading with you, and you keep on going, that at some point in time, you're going to be in a situation, you're going to ask God for help, you're going to plead for God's mercy, and He will turn a deaf ear to you. There is a point at which it's a done deal. You cannot go back from that point. Proverbs 21:13. Whoso stoppeth his ears at the cry of the poor, he also shall cry himself, but shall not be heard. Proverbs 28:9. He that turneth away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer shall be an abomination. Micah 3:4. Then shall they cry unto the Lord, but He will not hear them. He will even hide His face from them at that time, so that they behave themselves ill in their doings. You need to take that to heart, friends. If you are in a backslidden condition and ignoring the Lord, you need to take and put that to heart. That if you keep ignoring God and you keep turning a deaf ear to Him, that at some point in time you're going to ask God and try to talk to God and try to get through to God, and He's going to turn a deaf ear to you. Now, that's just all there are to it. So when God's dealing with you, you need to listen to Him. We all need to listen to Him. I mean, it's something we all need to take into heart and be sensitive. Don't harden your heart to God. Now, Zechariah 7:14, but I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations whom they knew not. Thus the land was desolate after them, that no man passed through nor returned, for they had laid the pleasant land desolate. Now, but I scattered them with a whirlwind. Brother Gill says that's denoting the fierceness of His wrath and the strength of His fury seen in the dispersion. So it's just like God spread those children of Israel out like a whirlwind. Psalms 58:9, before your pots can feel the thorns, He shall take them away as with a whirlwind, both living and in His wrath. Leviticus 26:22, I will send wild beasts among you, and which shall rob you of your children and destroy your cattle, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. So we see where God had told them that there was coming that time when the whirlwind was coming, and with its fierceness they were going to be destroyed and be scattered. Well, friends, tune in again next weekend for another edition of our virtual Sunday school class.
You have been listening to the Gospel Mailbox with Donnie Bryson. If you would like to contact the ministry, you may call Donnie at 423-355-3859. Write Donnie at P.O. Box 2446, Chattanooga, Tennessee 37409. Or email him at this email address, preacher@thegospelmailbox.org.